If you were learning a song and you heard this melodic phrase, where exactly would you play it? And more importantly, how many ways could you play it? And which of those interpretations do you think is the right one? Let's break it down in today's video. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Nate Comp from Dimecast, and today I'm going to cover something that I get asked about a lot, which is exactly how do I go about choosing where on the fretboard I want to play a specific melodic phrase. When I have a student ask me about this, I always introduce them to a concept that I like to call the Scenic Route. This is an idea that I've been working on for years, and it has really helped me to gain a better understanding of fretboard mechanics and expressive melodic phrasing in the context of a scale melody. This concept is built on the observation that there are actually 4 different dimensions of physical movement that you must be proficient with as a guitarist. And the goal is to internalize these 4 dimensions to the point where you feel like you have complete freedom of motion all around the neck. So in this lesson, I'll break down the basics of how to get started with this concept, and then I'll get to answering the original question of how do I go about choosing exactly where on the fretboard I want to play a specific melodic phrase. I'm also going to throw in 2 extra bonus ideas at the end of this video that really elevate this concept to another level, so you definitely want to check that out. All right, let's get right into it. The first dimension of physical movement on the fretboard is the north and south dimension, which is linear playing or single string playing. Let's say I wanted to play the notes of a C major triad arpeggio. I should be able to locate all of those notes by playing up and down a single string, or north and south like this. C, E, G, C, back to G, back to E, back to C, okay? Linear playing is a great way to visualize the spacing between letters. The second dimension of physical movement, probably the most common one, is the east and west dimension, which is position playing across multiple strings. If I wanted to play the notes of that C major triad arpeggio again, I should be able to find all of the same notes across and back several different strings in one position using this east and west movement like this. Now, because the guitar fretboard is filled with unisons or duplicate notes, there's always going to be several different positions or east and west patterns that you can use to play the exact same notes in the exact same pitches, okay? I just played this, C, E, G, C, E, G, C. Well, I could change positions and find all of the same notes, C, E, G, C, E, G, C. Okay, these are all the same functions in the key of C, it's the same musical alphabet letters, and it's the same pitches, just a different part of the fretboard. The third dimension of physical movement on the fretboard is the northeast and southwest diagonal. This is where we begin to get into the idea of floating position playing. So, using that same C major triad arpeggio, I should be able to locate all of the notes by playing diagonally across the fretboard using the northeast or southwest movement like this. Now, I could also change the fingering a little bit and get that same group of notes with a slightly different fingering. Okay, it's all unisons, it's all duplicate pitches. The fourth and final dimension of physical movement on the fretboard is the northwest and southeast diagonal. All right, this is another aspect of floating position playing. So, using the same C major triad, I should be able to locate all of the same notes and all the same pitches by playing diagonally this way using northwest and southeast motion. Okay. Now, this particular diagonal is a little bit weird, all right? This final dimension of movement, the northwest-southeast diagonal, is kind of strange because it's very counterintuitive as far as the hand motion that we are used to as guitar players. We tend to think of, oh, if my hand's going this way, pitches get higher. And if my hand goes this way, pitches get lower. This diagonal is the opposite of that. As I move down the fretboard, the notes are getting higher in pitch. And as I move up the fretboard, the notes are getting lower in pitch, and that's because I'm crossing strings diagonally. The phrase that I played at the beginning of this video was based on a C major pentatonic scale, where the melody just ascends and descends through one octave. C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. So let's use that simple scale phrase to explore the 4 different dimensions of physical movement on the fretboard. Okay. For the first interpretation, all right, we want to look at that C major pentatonic scale phrase using our first dimension of physical movement, which was the north and south dimension, or the linear sound that comes from playing on a single string, which would be this: C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. Now, the advantage of this method is that you can really see the specific pitch distances or the melodic interval spacing that exists between each note in the phrase. But the disadvantage of this method is that it's not exactly the most practical way to physically deliver this kind of melody, especially if you wanted to play this kind of melody at a much faster tempo. For this next interpretation, we can take that same C major pentatonic scale phrase and use our second dimension of physical movement, which is the east and west dimension, using position playing across multiple strings, which might sound like this: C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. Now, like I mentioned before, because the guitar fretboard is filled with unisons or duplicate notes, there will always be several different position options that you can use to play all of the same notes in an east and west fashion, like this. Instead of C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C, I might move to this part of the fretboard: C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C, or even this part of the fretboard: C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. It's all the same letters and all of the same pitches. I'm just changing positions. The advantage of this particular method is that it's much more efficient and practical from a technique perspective, because all of the notes fall right under your fingers in one specific area of the fretboard. And this is the main reason why so many guitar players love the position playing method. The disadvantage of this method is that you can't really see and appreciate all of the pitch distances or melodic spacing that happens between each note in the phrase, especially when you're crossing strings. And here's what I mean by that. When I played linear, C, D, E, G, A, C, I could see the spacing of a whole step and a whole step and 1.5 steps and a whole step and then 1.5 steps. When I play by position, C, D, E, G, A, C, yeah, C to D is a whole step, but here's the weird one. D to E is a whole step, okay? That doesn't look like a whole step because of the string change, but this sound is this sound, okay? On a single string, D to E whole step, pretty easy to spot that it's a whole step. But this doesn't really look like a whole step because of the fingering. Same thing here, G to A. When I played that on one string, pretty easy to see that G to A is a whole step. But here, because I'm crossing strings, I still want to think of this larger physical motion as being a whole step pitch distance. Once you've got a solid understanding of the first 2 dimensions of physical movement, here's how we're going to get to the other 2 dimensions. The idea of the scenic route is to play the first half of this phrase where the melody ascends using one type of fingering, and then play the second half of the phrase where the melody descends using a different type of fingering. When you play a melody using either the linear method north and south or the position method east and west, you usually follow the same physical path on the way up and on the way down, which is kind of like driving to the supermarket and then driving home using the same roads. The idea of the scenic route is that you no longer want to do that, and instead you want to intentionally take some back roads and choose to explore other paths physically while still arriving at the same destination melodically. So let's take a look at some examples. Here are 9 different examples of how you could use the scenic route to play this pentatonic scale phrase. Remember that the basic rule is to ascend with one fingering and descend with a different fingering. Here's the first example. Up this fingering and then down a different fingering. One more time. C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. So I'm not stuck in one position anymore. I'm actually moving to different positions. Here's the second example. C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. So up one fingering and down a different fingering, okay? Here's the third example. And I really like this one because I'm starting on this third fret C and then ending on an 8th fret C, okay? Here's the fourth example. Once again, ascend with one fingering and descend with a different fingering, okay? Here's the fifth example. Ending on the pinky, so starting on this C and ending on this C. All right? Here's the sixth example. So I'm starting on 8th fret C on the way up and then ending on 3rd fret C. Okay. Here's the next one, starting on the same C, but moving positions. Once again, Scenic Route is one path up and a different path down. Okay. Here's the next example. So ascending this pattern and then descending this pattern, okay? And then finally we have this one, this is probably my favorite one, up this pattern and then shifting to end on 3rd fret C. So C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. All of these are the same letters, the same functions in the pentatonic scale, and all of the same pitches, but once again, we're ascending and descending with a variety of different fingerings. The single most important thing to take away from this concept is this. When you are playing a melodic phrase, it's all about the sound you are trying to create and the specific notes that are associated with that sound, and not the fingerings. The long-term goal of practicing the Scenic Route exercises is to eventually eliminate the idea of fingerings altogether and just focus on the music and the story that you are trying to tell. As far as my answer to the original question of how do I go about choosing exactly where on the fretboard I want to play the sound of a specific melodic phrase, well, my answer to that is whatever fingering I happen to play in that moment. In other words, because I've practiced this idea so much, my instincts will take over so that when I hear a melodic idea in my head, my fingers will just naturally take whatever the most convenient path is. I might play the same melodic phrase 10 different times within a single song, and the fingerings that I end up using could be very different from one repetition to the next. And because my primary focus is on the sound that I'm trying to create and the specific notes that are associated with that sound, my fingers will just kind of choose their own adventure when it comes to the actual physical delivery of that phrase. Here's the first bonus step to add into the Scenic Route exercises. For every new path that you take with a melodic phrase, consider this. What kinds of articulations, inflections, and stylistic techniques could you apply to this interpretation? And how many opportunities are there in this particular fingering for you to use expressive stylistic elements? You will find that for every new road that you go down, each fingering will have a unique layout on the fretboard, and that will kind of invite you to use different types of articulations and inflections. For example, the first Scenic Route version that we had for this C major pentatonic phrase was this. Up this fingering and then down a different fingering, okay? Well, if I stylize that with some hammer-ons or pull-offs or slides or vibratos, this can become much more expressive. time. How about the second version of the Scenic Route? Okay, we had this combination of fingerings, up this and down this. Okay, well, let's make it a little more expressive. One more time. You want to take this idea of decorating a scale phrase and do it with every one of the variations of the Scenic Route. And once again, each new fingering is going to suggest certain types of articulations. But that's what this idea is all about. Not just exploring different paths on the fretboard, but different ways of being expressive. The second bonus step to add into the Scenic Route exercises is this. For every new path that you take with a melodic phrase, ask yourself, what kinds of melodic rhythms could I apply to this particular interpretation? And how much can I change the personality of this phrase if I experiment with the rhythmic placement of each note as well as the rhythmic duration of each note? You will find that for every new road that you go down, the specific layout on the fretboard for each new fingering will invite you to explore different forms of rhythmic interpretation in regards to both rhythmic location and rhythmic value. For example, one of the Scenic Route patterns that we had for this C major pentatonic phrase was this one. I went up this fingering and then down this fingering. Okay, C, D, E, G, A, C, A, G, E, D, C. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is stylize that. Okay, I might add some slides and hammer-ons and pull-offs. Okay. Now, I'm still playing this with a pretty consistent and even rhythm. Da, 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 right? And even though it's stylized, it's still rhythmically fairly straight. What if I reinterpret the rhythmic sound of this? Right? All of a sudden, this phrase takes on a whole new personality because of how I'm manipulating the rhythmic phrasing. Or I might go. I mean, how many variations could I come up with? You want to apply this idea of rhythmic variety and articulation to every version of the Scenic Route that we've gone through. Way back when YouTube was a new thing, I spent a lot of time watching live concert footage of many of my favorite players, and one of the things that really struck me was how different I was playing certain phrases versus how the original artist was playing those phrases. Because I've learned so much of my favorite music by ear, it's fascinating to see the difference between my own personal interpretation of certain musical sounds when compared to the person who was the original creator of those sounds, okay? The real light bulb moment for me was realizing that the choices I was making in regards to my own personal interpretations were directly responsible for defining my own style as a player. And I realized this is how I'm going to develop my own unique voice on the instrument. Instead of thinking of it as the right way to play something versus the wrong way to play something, you want to look at it as it's an opportunity to discover more about yourself and how you want to play music. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. And if you enjoyed this lesson, please smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.